Today's topic, we'll be taking a look at the Ark from the Big Finish Lost Stories range. I'm going to say this straight away. The draft formula for the Lost Stories, I would say the range has become a shadow of its former self. The original formula is just better. It's just a better formula. I personally think this deserves to be its own line. Then again, I understand why it's in the Lost Stories. It's more of a marketing decision of why that's the case. However, even though I believe that the draft stories in the Lost Stories is a shadow of its former self, I'm going to look at the Ark as its own thing in this review, because personally, I think it's quite a good release. It's miles better and miles worth your money compared to Daleks Genesis of Terror. I still to this day think that release is beyond pointless, and it just isn't worth the money, and it's a step down in quality. I'm talking about the Ark, and this release has more purpose behind it, and it's more different, but it does warrant release. The Lost Stories drafts are more intended for a specific niche. I would say this is the last draft I would buy. Not because it's bad, I don't think the Ark is a bad release. I just think they're just not really intended for me. So if they do any more, I'm just not going to bother reviewing them or getting them at all. But that being said, I think this is a good release. However, before we dive into the Ark in the review, I'm going to divert the intention of this video just a bit. I think it's rather important regarding the surroundings of the release of Daleks Genesis of Terror, only briefly. Yes, it is true, I am not a fan of the release. Many people weren't a fan of the release. Many people said it was a cash grab. Many people said it was pointless. And as well, it was a dip in quality. It was. Unfortunately, it's exposed some things which I think is quite sad to see. And this is coming from what a reviewer said to me, and what I have personally seen on Twitter that people have discussed. So someone I talked to and others on Twitter have said this: I want to do an honest review of Daleks Genesis of Terror, but I'm worried I will be blacklisted. I guess that does explain why some reviewers have swept this release under the rug and don't want to cover it, because they are afraid that they will be blacklisted by doing a criticizing review, or that they don't want to appear as more like shills for a company, because it's a very difficult story to defend. It is. I've read some reviews where they're more praising the damn Philip Hinchcliffe the interview, over the story itself. That's like me praising the Underwater Menace special features and then completely ignoring the reconstruction. Yeah, sometimes you need to take biases out of the equation. Big Finish are a company like any other company. This is just what companies do. It's just a marketing decision. If you don't represent companies how they want you to do it, they will just blacklist you, because I'm not a fit for them. My reviews are just too blunt and to the point. So if people feel that, and they feel that they can't do constructive reviews to the point they're fearing being blacklisted, then that's just simply sad. Because to me, that just provides unconstructive reviews which are just pointless. And I don't really appreciate inauthentic reviews which just shill for companies. And that's just companies in general. And I do morally oppose it too. And my answer to that, if you're worried about being blacklisted with any company, you need to know what's morally right. It's your relationship to a company or your authenticity as a reviewer. And yeah, some companies don't even allow a little bit of negativity, otherwise they just cut you off. That's just the corporate world and how it works. And yes, Big Finish are like a company like anybody else. That is what companies do. They have a right to cut off whoever they want, but then you have a right to do your honest thoughts to create a constructive review. Unfortunately, I have seen that pattern with this release. That's just me. I don't do Big Finish reviews for the company. I do it for their fans. That's the reason why I do it. Yeah, I think it's something that needed to be said. I just find it quite unfortunate that people even think that they can't be constructive in their own reviews. You're allowed to be constructive, and if they cut you off, then that's their loss. Anyway, let's get that out of the way. Let's get into the Ark now. The history of the Ark is a very interesting one. It's got a very interesting history, and some people are getting quite confused, me included, about the Ark, because you look at the title and it says Doctor Who The Ark, but wait a minute, that's the name of a William Hartnell episode. That's a little confusing. It was never originally called just The Ark, or Doctor Who and The Ark. It was never called that. John Lucarotti's version was called The Ark in Space, as is Robert Holmes's TV version of The Ark in Space. It was always called The Ark in Space when John Lucarotti worked on it. However, the inception of the idea of The Ark in Space never actually started with John Lucarotti. The story was originally titled Space Station, and it was by a writer called Christopher Langley. And this is the man who had first the idea of the second story of season 12. That would have been the space station set design as we see in The Ark in Space at Nerva. So this story went through 3 phases. Christopher Langley's version, which they weren't really impressed by, so John Lucarotti took it over. It was originally going to be a 6-parter, John Lucarotti's version. However, that was cut off because they thought the idea was too over-conceptualized. So Robert Holmes then replaced John Lucarotti, and then we have The Ark in Space as we know it. So yeah, this story, it went through a journey. 3 phases. 1, it just wasn't good enough. 2, it was over-conceptualized as a 6-parter. The audio isn't a 6-parter, it's a 4-parter. And then we have Robert Holmes to deliver one of the most famous 4th Doctor stories of all time. Yeah, Terrance Dicks was very impressed by John Lucarotti and his work writing space stories. Most importantly, from a show. It wasn't very successful, but he was still impressed by John Lucarotti. Story, I don't remember the name of the episode. It was from a show called Moonbase 3, and he was impressed by that story. It was set in space, and he commissioned John Lucarotti to work on The Ark in Space. But then again, it was too over-conceptualized and just a little bit too convoluted, that Terrance Dicks and Philip Hinchcliffe believed the story was just too convoluted and it needed to be cut down, get all the tat out of it, which that's what they thought, and Robert Holmes was the one to deliver it. Sorry, it wasn't Terrance Dicks who thought that, it was Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes who believed that. Yeah, there's your history lesson on The Ark in Space. You bored, or you just want me to get into the story? Let's get into the story. I will get the usual out of the way. Sadie Miller and Christopher Naylor performing Sarah Jane Smith and Harry Sullivan. They do the impressions well. That's just standard, what you expect. Both of them do amazing. So yeah, top notch to Sadie Miller performing Sarah Jane Smith and Christopher Naylor with Harry Sullivan. Some of the lines actually sound pretty authentic. Again, it isn't perfect, but it's flipping difficult to achieve a perfection when it comes to this stuff. It's not easy to do impressions, but they do it very well. Now, this is something which has crossed some people and split the story in half a bit. Some people are okay with it, and other people saying, this is a strange direction. It's how the 4th Doctor is characterised. And yeah, I do see it, but the 4th Doctor is very happy-go-lucky, very optimistic, and almost like overacting. I am aware that the lead actor and the director, that was a decision that they made, and apparently that's how it was written in the original script. If that's true, then fine, fair play. If it's they want to be authentic to the script and that's how it was written, then fair play to it. But yeah, I did find it a little odd, a little strange. eventually I kind of just got used to it, really. It doesn't bother me, but for some people have pointed out and said that the Fourth Doctor's performance is very like overplayed. I do see where they're coming from, but if that's being authentic to the script, then that's just being authentic to the script. So be prepared for the Fourth Doctor's performance to be a little bit unconventional, maybe. I don't really know the word to describe it. It might just take you back a little bit, his performance. But I got used to it. Others can speak for themselves. Terry Malloy also plays Narib, who is the villain, and Noah. Now this is quite funny. Or depressing, depending how you look at it. Terry Malloy had more to do in the Ark release than he did playing Davros, what he's famous for. Come on, man! Yeah, I had to do a little dig at Daleks, Genesis and Terror yet again. The fact he had one scene at the end of episode 1 just blows my freaking mind. Anyway, it does set itself up, the Ark, to be quite a tense space story. Like the Ark in space in some ways. It definitely succeeds that in episode 1 to 2. The sound design, top notch to it. It definitely builds up to be a space tense story. Episode 3 and 4, not so much. It kind of dies down and dwindles away a little bit. But in episode 1 and 2, it definitely establishes that feeling. But yeah, the differences into the setup and the different circumstances and how like Noah's written and whatnot, it's vastly, and I mean vastly different compared to Daleks Genesis of Terror, which I would just say is just a little bit different. It's just not different enough. This is vastly. And if it's vastly different, then I see, yes, it is warranted to be released as a draft story, like Return of the Cybermen. Now, its main function, the Ark, is not to be better than the Ark in space, because is it better than the Ark in space? No, it isn't. It's not designed to be better than the Ark in space. You can make an exception with that with Return of the Cybermen. A, like, what if of the Ark in space. If that interests you, the original idea, even though it's the second phase of it, that's the reason why you should get it. If you go into it thinking it's better than the Ark in space, that's just the wrong mindset. Narib's a pretty interesting character. Again, I understand why Robert Holmes changed the whole villains and replaced it with the Wirren. The Wirren, as tatty as they are, they're very iconic as like a space plague. The motivations with Narib are very different. Again, there is similarities to the Wirren and Narib and their alien species, that they have the ability to perform metamorphosis on humans and infect them. So they're similar, but they're more different than they are similar, but you can see the connections. It does take a while to see offensive capabilities from Narib. I'm just kind of waiting for him to do an offensive move besides barking orders like Noah. But the question is this: should you get this release if you're a fan of the Ark in space? Robert Holmes' Ark in space. It depends if you're interested in a what-if scenario of it. If you don't really care about the original draft, move on. Don't get it. I don't think it's good, but I don't think it's the height of the Lost Stories. It definitely does struggle to me in the second half with episode 3 and 4. Like I said, I was waiting for Narib to do more than just barking orders. Taking far too long to establish himself as a threat. That comes in like episode 4 when you see the metamorphosis take place. But yeah, my opinion is still the same. Even though this was a fairly good release, I still think they're a shadow of their former selves, the Lost Stories. I have been in between a 6 and a 7 out of 10. The more I think about it, the more I am inclined to give it a 7, because I did actually enjoy the release. I thought it was fun, I thought it was interesting, I thought it was vastly different enough to warrant the price, because its main purpose is to be a older draft version of the Ark in space, and that Daleks Genesis of Terror should have realistically been a bonus. Just episode 1, forget 2 and 6, it was pointless. I think standalone wise, it's a good release out of 7 out of 10. That's a over positive rating. But it goes back to the question for me, is it Is this the best direction of the Lost Stories? Personally, no. It would work better under a different line. Then again, I understand why it's in the Lost Stories to a marketing decision. Because I guess in the way they are, it's out of the traditional formula. That's why some people are like, do I consider it a Lost Story? In a way it is, but it's vastly different to the original formula. It's just the original formula of the Lost Stories is just better. And that doesn't mean there are Lost Stories in the original formula which are better than this. That I'm not saying that at all, as there are some questionable Lost Stories. The second Doctor box set, Mission to Magnus, Hollows of Time, so the original Lost Stories aren't perfect by any means, it's just, it was a good formula. But the Ark gets a 7 out of 10 for me. Standalone wise, I thought I enjoyed it. It was a good story. And I would say I need to listen to Return of the Cybermen again, but this was definitely my favourite out of the 3. If they do more, personally, unless it's heavily requested when someone goes, my god, this is like one of the best Big Finish releases of all time, I will get it. But as of now, I'm not going to get any more of them. These drafts are designed for a specific niche. I just don't think I'm that niche. So in the next Big Finish review, I'm going to take a look back at the heights of the Lost Stories. I'm going to be reviewing the Elite, because it deserves it. So that'll be the next Big Finish review. And for new content released from Big Finish, I have noticed that they're doing Season 6B releases in July, or 1. So I'm definitely having a look at that. So that's the topic. Thanks for watching.